Mrs. Wittes. Here. Dr. Sully will be late. Mr. Dangler.
Here.
And I hereby certify that this meeting has been published in the newspapers in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act and posted as required by law.
Thank you. Item number 1, discussion regarding tree conservation and the ordinance.
Should be.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, so there was a desire to address tree removal within the city. I had the opportunity to, study ordinances across the state, analyze them in terms of the capabilities of our department and what we could effectively manage and administer. So essentially what we established is a process where someone would have to apply for a permit to remove a tree over a certain caliper, where that person would then have the opportunity to replace that tree with the tree that's on the approved species list, which was provided to me by the Environmental Commission. Those are deciduous trees that are native to this area. So the homeowner or the developer would have the opportunity to either replant with that species or provide a dollar contribution for the replacement of the tree.
Now, is this just a residential, just a typical homeowner, or the construction field too?
It would be for both,
For both?
yes.
So anything we need to be aware of with that from your experience? Like you said, you spoke with other areas. I mean, is it pretty straightforward?
Well, I came up with something that's very straightforward for us. You come in, you identify what you're removing, you tell us what size it is, and then we establish the fee structure or the replanting mechanism for the tree removal.
So,
Yeah.
this doesn't apply to, let's say a homeowner has a tree that's about to fall on top of their house, that doesn't apply to that, does it? The dangerous?
No, it specifically exempts dead, diseased, or trees that cause a hazard to public safety.
Okay.
Who's the person that makes a decision on that type of request?
That would be the zoning office.
We do qualify every year a tree expert.
Tree expert or arborist?
Yeah, I believe we do qualify every year.
Yes.
Is that correct? Nick?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so if there was ever really some issue.
Now, I know the majority of the trees we see, it's pretty evident when you go out, this tree's dead, it needs to come down, but for those ones where it's, on the borderline, there's definitely some people we could bring in if needed.
But this will stop a lot of trees from being removed unnecessarily also.
Well, it gives people the ability to remove the tree, but then there's a mechanism to replace the tree.
Yes.
And it also develops a fund that allows you to replace trees. So that's the other part about it, is that's part of the theory also, is that you'll now have funds that you can use to plant trees other places.
And then I like the fact that depending on the size of the tree that you're removing, you may have to replace it with more than one tree.
Correct.
So that's a positive thing too. The only question I have is in enforcement. So for example, like Mario pointed out, let's say you have a dead tree in the back of your house or that one's going to fall. Does that mean that every individual then would still have to go get a permit, and then an officer would have to come out and determine, yes, that's dead, you can take it out, or yes, it's about to fall on your house and you can take it out? You know what I mean? How does that work?
Oh, we could fine tune that aspect of it, but I think for a lot of things, you have to, go on the word of the homeowner or do the site inspection and see if the trees, because the dead or injured or hazardous tree, that's what's exempt from the fee or the replacement schedule. So you'd still have to pull the permit to remove the tree.
Now, when, people go before the planning board, are they now given a list of the trees that, have been, you know, determined to do well in this area? I know the environmental commission was working on that list and everything, and, will they be given that list as well?
Well, this would then become an ordinance where if people were removing shade trees during their site plan or subdivision application process, they'd have to replace them with the native species.
Okay.
And then I also, you know, I know when I do my review letters for the board, I recommend that the plantings be, you know, native species to the greatest extent possible.
Now, the only, question that I have, a typical homeowner comes to you and wants a zoning permit for the tree. Delay in the permit, instead of if they bring you proof, some kind of pictures or something, that the tree is dead already, would you be able to give them the permit right away, or do you have to have somebody inspect it?
I think if they gave us photo documentation, we'd be able to issue the
That's
permit
what I
on
was
the
thinking.
spot.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Thank you, Nick.
I just, if this is the path that everybody wants to proceed on, I could work with, Lou's office on fine tuning, you know, a couple aspects of this and, getting it ready to, adopt if desired.
Lou, do you have any experience with this in terms of,
I think I wrote the first one in the state in Sayreville. And I've written them in, they're in every town that I represent, so, yeah, and, one of the things that we're seeing here, which is the part of the world that's not Nick's part of the world, it's really more Mike's part of the world, is there should be a, you know, a tree fund, and it should have some indication as to how it should be used.
So there should be, which means we don't have one now?
No, we don't have it.
Because I okay.
Well, we have this provision says that it should go into a designated trust account, but we really should have a provision in here creating the tree fund so that there is a trust account, because the money's gonna go in,
Yeah.
It's dedicated for that purpose. We have to dedicate it by rider, is that what we're talking about doing, Mike?
If we create one, we will have to, yeah.
Yeah, we'll dedicate it by rider in the budget so that, because otherwise, any income you get goes into the general fund unless it's designated by a rider to your budget to go into a specific account. But we should also have a provision here that says how it's spent, because there's things that you can use, you have to decide what you wanna use the fund for. You can use it some towns use it just to plant trees on public property, and some use it to plant on private property too, so, my simplistic view of this is trees are trees, right? It's good to have them planted anywhere, as long as they're planted in the city, you know, they serve the same purpose, right? So, so we try to make it as broad as possible to give you the ability to, to use the fund and however it is that you think is appropriate. My experience with this is that most towns have very big tree funds and can't figure out what to do with them. So, if you're gonna collect this money, I mean, it's not insignificant. I mean, I have, towns that the number is $300 in a tree for a 3-inch tree. I mean, it's big numbers. So when you go in and you have somebody that clears 1.5 acres of land, you're talking about a pretty sizable check that's gonna get written. So now you have this money, but you have to decide what you wanna do with it. That's a policy question that you have to have.
Can that money be used, like for other things such as like the community gardens and things like that?
You can if you want to. You have to, so you can't this can't just be a method of raising taxes, right? So you can't use it generally. So there has to be some causal connection to, the theory behind this is you want to diminish the number of trees that get destroyed, and you're collecting funds for the purposes of replacing trees.
Right.
So if you stray too far from that, if you use it to paint a municipal building, then somebody could come in and say, okay, so this is just a tax, right? It's not anything other than a tax. It's got nothing to do with administering this fee, and it's got nothing to do with actually replacing trees. So you really can't stray too far from that.
Right.
Because it's for this specific
Well, the
purpose.
primary goal is to replace the trees
Correct.
with funds.
Correct.
But if in the event that there's, an overabundance of funds, then maybe we can, use it, on the gardens or things like that.
Well, look, the answer that I'll correct answer, the technically correct answer is that if you're raising this money and you're not spending it, then you're raising too much money. Right? You should be raising money that you're going to spend. So I always tell people that if you're gonna do this, you should do it with a thought in mind that, you know, we could have $50,000 in the first year, what are we gonna do with it? Now, I don't know if you have a shade tree replacement, policy, you know, when you fix sidewalks, you're gonna have to take trees down because the trees are what destroys the sidewalks, you can plant smaller trees, and you can use this money for that, obviously.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing park improvements and you can, you know, if you were gonna build some new facility and you decided that you were gonna landscape it and put trees around it, you could use this money to offset those costs. But that's what you should try to keep to that. You know, a community garden is probably not too far afield, but like I said, if you told me that you were using it to construct bathrooms by the beach, I would tell you that you probably shouldn't use the money for that. Because all that happens is that then somebody will come in, by the way, like I said, these are significant checks, somebody will come in and say, hold on a second, I'm not writing a $50,000 check, this ordinance is, you're using it to, you know,
Yeah,
to pay for people in the finance department, doesn't make any sense to me.
yeah. So is this really part one of another presentation that needs to happen?
No, we'll put all of this in the ordinance, it's just that we're doing this, and you know, at the time comes when you go to do your budget, right? You're gonna, you know, Mike's gonna say to you, by the way, you've got, you know, $42,000 in your tree fund, what is it that you're gonna do? And the administration will have to, you know, start to develop the plans for using those, and then come to you and say, you know, as part of the budget process, we want to appropriate $42,000 to pay for our shade tree program, and we're gonna charge it against the tree fund.
So, let me just comment on why I asked the question, that, you know, we have the whole process explained, and detailed upfront rather than part of it, and then when it's, you know, when we're faced with the next situation, it's like, oh, well, we didn't document that. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, we'll get the ordinance in a form so that it'll be in place to start to collect the money, and then it's like anything, if you're gonna, you know, if the initiative is to plant more trees, and that's what you should do.
Yeah.
In a couple of towns I've spoken to, and I haven't gotten anybody to do it, where they have, you know, I have towns that have hundreds of thousands of dollars in a tree fund. And I always thought that it wouldn't be a bad idea to just go out and get a contractor who you bid out to, you know, how much will you charge the town to plant, you know, X kind of trees. And just say to, and then just let people, you know, give them to people to plant trees in their yards. Because my theory is planting trees is planting trees, right? You're gonna take trees down, you're gonna plant them, and it's almost a nice benefit to give to people, as long as you're planting trees, you know. And we all know we've all put trees in our backyards, they're not cheap.
It's a really good tool too to replace street trees and.
Right, that's the,
And
well,
then-
that's the first reason this stuff is designed, is to replace street trees, especially if you do sidewalks. Because you have, you know, it's a big cost.
Street trees and trees in parks are the
Yes, that's where
the
you
two
start,
big
yeah.
benefits.
So if the goal is to replace not only to replace them, but to replace them and add to them, right, more trees, then the question is, if somebody has 50 trees in their front yard, they have the option to just pay the amount for 50 trees, and then I would assume that we would be obligated, or someone would make sure that those 50 trees that are lost there would be put somewhere else.
Correct.
Is that the
Yeah,
idea?
you
Is that
either
the-
have to pay into the fund or you have to replace the trees.
Right.
So if you're,
So you'd have to kind of keep it, you wouldn't go into cabanas or,
Yeah, yeah.
you wouldn't want to stray very much
No,
from
you'd
that
wanna
goal.
use it for
You'd wanna
trees.
use it
Yeah.
specifically
Trees,
for
definitely, yeah.
replacement and adding to. Right.
yeah, because the underlying legal basis for it is that you're going to replace trees. That's what, there's been cases that have challenged these ordinances, and as long as there's a relationship there. But if it just looks like you're using it to raise money, then
Right.
it just, they just consider it's just a tax, and you're not authorized to tax people for this purpose.
Good.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rose.
discussion for ordinance, single use of plastic bags.
So I've circulated, we had a presentation, I've circulated a draft ordinance. We should all be aware, by the way, that there is a bill that is moving through the legislature. My understanding is that it's going to, it's in Senator Smith's committee, and I think he's the prime sponsor. My understanding is that there is going to be a state law that's gonna get adopted in the lame duck session of the legislature. So that means between now and January 14th. The governor's committed to sign it, so, we're moving ahead with this ordinance, understanding that there's a possibility that that state law might preempt whatever the ordinance is. If the state decides that they're going to do X, Y, or Z, that's what will control. So, what we have a draft ordinance, it's based upon recommendations from the Environmental Commission and then some ordinances from surrounding communities, and so we put it together. I don't know if anybody has any questions on it.
No,
I think it's pretty, I think
I thought it was pretty clear, yeah.
Okay.
So, I think we have a wonderful opportunity for a civics lesson to, go back to the students that came to us at that council meeting at some point. And, you know, however we do this, if we do it in the school, or if we ask them to come to the council meeting, to show them that we listened to them, and that what they presented was a very important point, and this is how it's moving forward. Just a civics, I think it's a great opportunity, whenever we do it and however we do it. It's just my suggestion.
I like this.
And there's a couple of things that are in here and, that I wanted to, obviously this is all in draft, but, there is a grace period.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think in Atlantic Highlands, it might have been a year, but it gives people a period of time to
Use up
get
their-
it. So,
yeah.
yeah, that's, I just put date, so you'll have to decide what that date is that you want to,
Yeah.
you know, how long you wanna give people.
So, yes, Lou, the only thing that kinda caught my eye was, the enforcement piece, which I think will be a little bit challenging. And there was one part that just said, if the, I probably don't have the wording right, but the way I read it, I thought it implied that if the code officer is informed of, you know, of a, you know, a store or something in violation, that then they would, pursue that. So is it kind of like that passive kind of enforcement that, or the code officer would have to be enforced rather than a more aggressive kind of?
Well, we do all of this by code enforcement. There's I think what you might be referring to is there's a provision in here that says that a citizen can act as a complaining witness.
Right,
So if
right,
a citizen came in and said, look, there's a business down on the street,
Right.
and the code enforcement officer didn't see it, the citizen could sign that, could be the complaining witness also.
Mm-hmm. So it'll be a combination.
Mhm.
Yeah, and, well, just a comment, because I had already tried with 7-Eleven, you know, like, probably 2 months ago, to say, why do you keep having these plastic straws, you know? And it, you know, goes back to the idea that, well, corporate, you know, that's what they buy for all
Sure, sure.
7-Elevens. So it'll be a little bit challenging, but, so, just a comment.
The state statute would also ban paper bags too, it was going even further.
I saw that.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bill got pretty close to getting posted for a vote, and then my understanding is that that issue is what has
Yeah.
held up the discussion.
Yeah, I heard
And I have no
something like that too.
inside knowledge as to how that all is gonna play out, but that's just what I hear.
Okay. Is that code? That's code?
No, it's serious. It's really, no, I think that issue, I read it in the Star Ledger, that the
Yeah.
paper bag part of it is the part that it was about to go to get onto a board list to get voted on, and that part was being reworked in committee, is my understanding.
So it says, street vendor on here, is that pertaining to like when we have events as
Mhm.
well? So that's
Yeah.
inclusive of everything?
Sure.
Okay.
By the way, I wanna thank the people on the environmental commission.
Yes.
They were
Yeah,
very helpful
thank
to
you.
me in getting
review of the regular meeting agenda. Any questions?
No.
I had a question, and Mario, I thought this actually went back to a conversation that you and I had, in terms of the parking. Didn't you ask that the time be changed from 8 to 9?
The answer that if we were to change it, we would have to postpone, because we already had the reading, so we'd have to redo the whole.
You know, we'd have to re-advertise it. It's a substantive change.
So we agreed that we've been talking about this long enough that we need to move
Yeah.
forward.
Okay.
I mean, commuting with Bill, communicating with us.
And the mayor, we did.
Okay, okay.
Any other concerns or questions about the agenda?
What does it mean to be the official newspaper of the city?
So you're required by state law to designate a newspaper in which your official public notices are published. So when we publish the notice for the year of the council meetings, you have to publish it. When we advertise for public hearings on ordinances, you have to advertise in the official newspaper.
Okay.
And it's a very convoluted and way, as, you know, in the old days, it used to be any newspaper that was published in your municipality and anybody had one, but these days there aren't. So I don't know, we usually probably do the Star Ledger and who,
We do the Asbury
Asbury
Park
Park
Press and
Press.
the Link.
and like, but it's designated by state law as to what newspapers qualify as official newspapers.
Okay, so as long as you do it in those particular ones,
right.
then
So
you're
if you're
covered.
you have a zoning board application, you have to put in, you can't put it in the Daily News, you've got to put it in the official newspaper.
What about, like Word on the Shore, the ones that are on the internet?
online.
How does that?
They have not, the legislature has not authorized internet newspapers as being official newspapers as of yet. They're printed, they literally say printed and published.
Oh,
It is it's one of those things where if you wanna cause a firestorm in Trenton, introduce a bill that changes publications being from newspapers to online.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
you know,
It was attempted, right?
It was attempted, because, you know, the first thing they teach you in politics is you never fight with people who buy, ink by the barrel. So, my understanding is that the newspapers in the state get something like $20 million a year from advertisements, you know, sheriffs, municipalities, county, and it's a huge income stream for an industry that needs the income stream, so they have not authorized it yet.
So, just.
We can if you want, it's just not official. And the New Jersey Press Association reproduces every public notice on their website. You can go to the New Jersey Press Association website and search for public notices by municipality.
Oh.
So they are available there.
Yeah.
It's just that they're not the official.
Yeah. Okay. Just one last question, and this is just a thought. You know, we changed the time for the workshop from starting, we used to start at 6 to start at 5:30. Do we wanna stay to 5:30? Just throwing it out there as a
Versus
thought.
what?
Now that we're a little more disciplined in our.
3:30.
I was thinking 4, but
I'm not making a comment.
Just putting it out there.
She's sitting next to me.
Take that, you know, let's see, 2 more years, bring that back up,
Okay,
towards the end of the 2 years.
okay, all right.
No, we don't want, I don't think we wanna change the time.
Okay, I just,
I mean, we can do it at 6:30. You wanna go to 6:30 instead of 5:30?
I don't think 6:30
right?
is
Didn't you
gonna
change
give
it
us
to
enough
5:30?
time.
It was 6.
6
It was
o'clock.
6.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, I'm just kidding,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
yeah, okay.
Well, are you suggesting something?
No, I'm just saying, do we still feel that we need the hour and a half, or do we think that an hour is sufficient?
Oh, I
That's all
think-
I'm putting out
What
there.
do
I think
you
you need
think?
the time.
I think we gotta keep it as
I
it is.
think-
Okay, all right.
Consensus says, make it easy on yourself.
Okay, there you go.
Don't put too much pressure.
We've really become a team, I'm gonna tell you, that's nice to.
Okay, good. Can I have a motion to close?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
I need a motion to adopt the resolution, go into executive session for the following items: contract negotiations, 2020 insurance renewal, Ocean Gate, and attorney-client privilege.
So,
Second.
Mr. Mr. Viera?
Yes.
Dr. Vogt?
Yes.
Mrs.